finding the best method, and you are like, what assumption are you based on? I'm kind of confused about this part.
Can you?
Let me just find and read the question. Sorry. So the last part just says rank the different methods in terms of their performance. In the end, your conclusion will be that a particular algorithm performed the best. Briefly state the assumptions that this conclusion is based on. I'm confused about the last. What assumption?
Could be a lot of things. For example, you could say that this method is the best because its cross-validation performance is the best. You could say this method is the best. So I want to say, why do you think this method is the best?
Okay.
For example, you could have a method whose, let's say you have an algorithm that you train on data, but every run of the algorithm gives you a different model. And to account for that, let's say you do it 20 times, take the average accuracy, and you do this across all methods. What if the average of a certain method is very high, but its variance is really large? What if the average is high, but the variance is peak? Which one would you prefer in such things?
Thanks.
Other questions? So, have people had any luck getting the decision tree plus SVM to do better?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good. So you've huh?
So I was curious what other people were doing, but just what I found is that on the training step, it actually did really well. Like, we would almost do it nearly perfect.
On the training set.
On the training, I got
Yeah, and then when you generalize,
Not surprising at all.
yeah, on the generalizing, it seems like you got about a boost with about a few percentage
Yes,
points.
yes. That typically often happens, which is also interesting. The primary lesson that I want to from this homework is that ensembles are good. You had sent me an email about this.
Well, yeah, which still confuses me. Like, how do we come up with an ensemble? Like, in this case, it was given.
In this case, it's given. In general, you be creative about it.
Okay.
So the general idea of an ensemble is instead of a single classifier, a panel of classifiers can do a better job. And it has been studied in the statistics literature quite a bit under this idea of bootstrap estimates, where if the variance of a single training set is high, then an ensemble tends to do better. And as another way of style of analysis for ensembles is the AdaBoost algorithm, where you can learn a classifier that boasts. So we can think of an ensemble as the way you get an ensemble is its hypothesis class is richer than any single element. The class of linear combinations of decision trees is more complex than any single tree. So you're getting a richer class of functions, and no wonder you're doing better, no wonder you're fitting the training set more, and such things. Another announcement, there will be a homework released later today or most likely early tomorrow morning.
So this is not actually an ensemble, right, for decision trees. There are just 100 different decision trees. We are not doing a majority.
It's a weighted majority. The linear.
Yeah, when we apply SVM on top of
That's
it,
what
then it becomes.
that's what I'm calling it. That's the ensemble.
Okay.
Yes. An ensemble is simply, you can think of it as a committee.
Yeah.
Yes. Which is the reason why we do committees and democracy and such things. The other announcement, I've been going over your intermediate reports. Most likely I'll be able to get all your feedback back to you by the next class. But some of you have already been meeting me about your project, and if you have any questions, feel free to show up, send me an email, or come to my office hours. Don't be stuck. It's so much more easy to just come and chat with me, and I'll try to unstuck you. Don't be stuck for too long. Any questions about any of these things? Right, so we are in the thick of probabilistic learning, and those of you who attended the faculty candidate talk this morning, you would have seen, I an example of how you can go crazy with Bayesian methods. In particular, this talk was about using Bayesian methods to identify what is the shape of a room and what are the furniture, where's the furniture, and how are people walking around and such things. And the game is basically, it's a rather complex version of the kind of stuff that we are talking about. And it's the kind of stuff that typically flies in computer vision or NLP. But we are in the beginning part of this, so hopefully if you see this and you read papers, you'll recognize many of the concepts as being the same. Things like maximum likelihood estimation, or we never talked about sampling, but that's another strategy that shows up a lot. We have been talking about the naive Bayes classifier, and remember the naive Bayes assumption, which is that all features are conditionally independent of each other given the label. And this lets us write down the map estimate of the map maximum a posteriori probability of a label given an input as that product at the bottom. Simply, in other words, we can predict the label by taking the maximum of P of y times product of all P of x I given y. And you have been staring at naive Bayes in your homework as well, so you must be somewhat comfortable at least thinking about something like this. And in particular, your homework question guides you through what is an interesting limitation of the naive Bayes problem. And you might notice that the homework question runs, or naive Bayes runs into some difficulties in that function. So we were, when we left off, we were talking about an application of naive Bayes. It's popular, it's very often used for classifying text, for building document classifiers. And the reason is, one of the reasons is it's ridiculously easy to train. Training a naive Bayes classifier is equivalent to just counting various things. For example, for say I want to classify a document as spam or not spam, step 1, figure out some feature representation for a document. Just for fun, let's say we're going to have a high dimensional feature vector whose dimensionality is the number of words in your vocabulary. And for a given document, every word that exists in the document gets a 1 in that feature, and 0, all other features are 0. It's also called the unigram model. So let's say you have n labeled documents, and the way you train, first estimate the prior probability of, say, a document or an email being spam. You just count how many of these are spam, divide by the total number of documents, and you call that the probability of spam. And probability of not spam is simply 1 minus that. This is the prior class probability. And we need to estimate P of xj given y, which in this case, probability of a single word given the label. And remember that this is simply counting how many times a word appears with that label, divide by the number of times the word appears by itself, the label appears. I've just written this as count of W and a label. This is a rather easy task, and in fact this kind of a classifier, if you are more into the system C aspects of things, it's rather easy to implement this in something like MapReduce, for example, because MapReduce is particularly built for things like counting words. Question? What is the vocabulary? Good, yes. So what if a particular word never occurs with a label? Suppose count of, let's say, anteater, spam is 0. Should the probability of anteater given spam be 0? Not necessarily. And we talked about smoothing. Smoothing is just adding fake counts. And what I have written here is perhaps the simplest kind of smoothing. Yes.
Just a quick question on the priors. So, from what you've seen, do people usually bias their their naive Bayes that way, or do they do more of a uniform distribution? So instead of saying the priors are, okay, how many span or how many.
No, this is important because
Or you just do 1 over, or, you know.
half.
Half, yeah.
No, this is, the prior ends up becoming important, especially if your classifier is something like, say for example, cancer or not cancer. And without the prior, the likelihood is going to will be the only thing, and anytime you get a little simple symptom, which is most likely not cancer, but the likelihood will dominate. So priors are as important here. I don't want to give the same example for spam because I have no confidence in saying that most emails are not spam. But in general, the class priors are rather important because we care about predicting P of y given x. And we need to say, if we just do P of, if we only do argmax P of x given y, then we are completely ignoring the information that subclasses are extremely unlikely. Right. So I was talking about smoothing. This is the simplest kind of smoothing. You pretend that every word occurs once. You create a fake data set where every word occurs once with both labels. And so that adds 1 to the count of everything. So you end up with not having zeros. You could, in theory, not do 1. You could have some small epsilon here, and this term will get scaled by epsilon. Questions? Yeah.
So, seems the vocabulary is very large.
It is.
Then, like, you need a very large training set. Otherwise, the count span and count non-span just go away.
Sort of, yes. For most words, they will disappear. And what that really means, the one explanation for that is that most words are not discriminative. Most words don't really tell you anything about spam or not spam. It's only certain words that will bias this decision. So, and I don't want to, that's the intuitive answer. The more formal answer there is, this is what the model says. So that's about it. So we've seen this, and this should not be too much of a shock for you. Well, hopefully nothing in this class is too much of a shock, because if there is one point of this class I want to point out is, I want you to learn is that there's no magic in machine learning. Once you get to the sausage factory, it's all just dirty work. Let's think about the decision boundaries of naive Bayes. We've been thinking about decision boundaries of all kinds of classifiers. And say you have, and we can at least intuitively think about, given a vector or given the space of the features, how does the naive Bayes classifier tear apart that space as positive and negative? That's the decision boundary. I'm not going to work through this in great detail. I just want to take the first couple of steps and then point you to a resource where you can read it. So to get to the decision boundary, we want to know what kinds of example will cause the label to flip from plus to minus. In other words, we predict a label, we predict an example to be positive if the probability of positive is more than the probability of negative. That's the definition of argmax. In other words, P of y equals plus times the product of blah blah blah. Plus is more than the same thing for minus. I can take just divide the second side, assuming there are no zeros and such things. You divide these, and this is easy. So far there's nothing much going on. Let's take the log of this. It turns out, if you take the log of this and work through some not so tedious algebra, you end up getting a linear function in the input features. What this means is that the decision boundary, so what you want is this log of this whole expression. If you take the log, the right hand side becomes 0. So you predict a plus if W transpose X plus B is greater than 0. In other words, the naive Bayes classifier is actually a linear threshold unit. It's a linear function in the feature space. It's just, you can think of it as sine of w dot x. Everything that we know about linear classifiers applies here. So this is an algorithm for learning a linear classifier, which is kind of interesting by itself. By the way, this proof is rather easy. I don't want to work through this in class because the algebra is somewhat tedious. I've written it up in a PDF. I've linked to it on the class website. I strongly encourage you to go over the proof because it's surprisingly easy. And if that's not enough of a motivation, something about an exam or something like that. So, the important point I want you to notice is that the naive Bayes classifier is a linear classifier, and in your homework you've been playing with this example of another linear threshold unit and trying to learn it with a naive Bayes. How many of you solved the problem? 1, 2. Okay, so the homework is due today, so I'm not going to give away the homework. So, yes. I'm not going to give away the secret, but it doesn't matter if I tell you the following, since all of you are here and it's fair to everyone. Turns out the naive Bayes classifier cannot actually learn that function, even though it's linear. So there are linear functions. So the naive Bayes classifier learns a linear decision function, linear threshold unit. But there are linear threshold units which cannot be learned with naive Bayes.
So in my calculations, you predict the corner case is correct.
Redo your calculations.
No, I checked them twice, and I wrote all the calculations.
Let's talk about this afterwards. But the fact still holds. There are linear threshold units which cannot be learned with naive Bayes. Which means that really, maybe even though naive Bayes is such an easy learning algorithm because learning is trivial, maybe it's not the best thing that you should use.
Well, it's naive.
It's naive, yes, but here's the surprising part. For text classification, naive Bayes does surprisingly well. Yeah.
That happens in the linear classifier also, right? We can't really separate XOR with linear classifier, so we go to high dimension.
No. This is a stronger statement. Even functions that are linearly separable,
Okay.
there exist functions which are linearly separable and yet naive Bayes can't find them. Even though the hypothesis space of, which means effectively the hypothesis space of naive Bayes is not the set of all linear functions. It's a subset of linear classifiers. So, yeah.
So it means that when you're doing these calculations, there must be some kind of preconditions for example, W and X, so that this equation holds, yeah?
Not so much. Actually, if you just, what will end up happening is, this is just algebra in fact. You just need to get everything that does not have any X term. It will be some log of an ugly function, call it P. And then every xi will be multiplied by some log probabilities, some ratios of log probabilities, and that will be log of probability ratios, and that will be the WI.
So, but these equations suggest that the naive Bayes algorithm can
No, it's not for all W. There exists a specific. This can be simplified in this form. That's it. There is a function with W and B which is equivalent to this. So, the one other point that I wanted to mention, all the examples that we did in class so far were with discrete features. Many of these things generalize to continuous features. If you have discrete features, you have Bernoulli random variables. P of xi given y is a coin toss. It's a single bit and it's a coin toss. If it's a continuous feature, you can assume that it's a normal distribution. Same sort of analysis carries through. It still becomes a linear function, and you can do maximum likelihood estimation. There will be no surprises if you, in fact, I encourage you to work out maximum likelihood learning for naive Bayes with real features. There should be no surprises. Just like in the discrete case where you ended up basically counting and dividing the most natural thing. The probability of a feature xi being 1 when the label is y is count of how many times that feature occurs with the label divided by how many times the label occurs. Something very similar shows up even when you do when you have continuous features and assume normal distributions. And you can also show that that's also a linear function. So there's nothing, things don't change significantly once you move to continuous features. So let me wind up the naive Bayes part of this lecture. Yeah.
Question. So, do we create a hypothesis with the naive Bayes or just a predictor or a classifier? I'm mixing, I'm confusion.
So think about it this way. The hypothesis space for naive Bayes. So remember we had these these symbols P, A and B. P is the prior, A, I or AJ is the probability of xj given plus, and you have probability of xj given minus. These set of numbers are the hypotheses. The space of all such possible numbers, all probabilities. It's not independent because they need to add up to 1, they need to be between 0 and 1 and that. That's the hypothesis space. Learning is search over this hypothesis space, and it just so happens in this particular case, learning is analytically solvable.
Going over the data.
Well, no. The maximum likelihood estimation can be done on paper. The optimization was done on the whiteboard, so there is no algorithm as much. And the solution that you get is the hypothesis that best, in some sense, fits the data for a particular definition of best, which is maximum likelihood. So, does that clarify? The final thing that you get, the set of probabilities that you get is a single hypothesis. So let me summarize the naive Bayes discussion. Just to remind you, naive Bayes has a strong independence assumption. All features are conditionally independent given a label. And maximum likelihood learning of naive Bayes is rather simple. And I just mentioned it generalizes to real valued features. Prediction is via map estimation, and it turns out many of these things that I just mentioned generalizes beyond binary classification. It's just easier to work out the binary classification. If you're interested, you can do a similar sort of analysis for multi-class. Two important caveats. One, which is almost always true, the independence assumption is not valid, and you can approach that problem in two ways. One, actually both, you can approach that problem in one way actually. So what? You can still train a classifier and hope it works, with the knowledge that it may not necessarily work. Smoothing is rather important if you're using naive Bayes. Without smoothing, you will run into all these singularities, things become 0, and you don't want that to happen. And for binary classification, the decision boundary of naive Bayes is linear. And this is just an interesting, it's not just an interesting anecdote, it's also something that's useful to realize because in fact this is a prelude to a much bigger point. Many complex models end up being linear functions in different spaces unless you explicitly introduce a kind of nonlinearity that makes it impossible to disentangle. So, are there questions about naive Bayes? If not, I'm going to slightly change gears to this discussion on on something that's important, something that you might run into very often, and it's one of those general machine learning concepts, like say the curse of dimensionality. This is about discriminative versus generative modeling. And this is the difference between these two is in the style of predictors that we are training. For nearly most of the semester, we looked at the following kinds of classifiers. We are given a data set with a fixed, which is drawn from a fixed but unknown distribution. And by the way, so far I assume that we had a fixed unknown distribution x and an oracle function. here I've written the distribution is over x cross y, and I'm going to argue they're not very different if the function, oracle function is fixed. You're given a data set, and learning is defined as the following problem. Identify a hypothesis space, H, define a loss function, find a hypothesis which minimizes loss on this data. And all the learning theory guarantees that we saw tell us that if the loss on the training set is low plus some regularization, then in general things will be fine in the future. And really that's what we care about, the fact that the classifier has to do well on future examples. An important common aspect to all these models is that in every one of these we learn a function that makes a prediction. We learn some hypothesis which takes x and produces the y. In other words, what we are doing is directly estimating a function that tries to find p of y given x. It doesn't matter necessarily that whether we explicitly try to find that function or not. We are modeling probability of y given x, and models that try to do that are called discriminative models. And the reason for that is you only care about discriminating the class labels. You don't care necessarily about describing the instance space. You don't want to waste your parameters to actually describe the space x. Let me contrast that with a generative model. A generative model explicitly models how instances are generated for each class. In other words, you have to find parameters or fit the following two probabilities, p of x given y and p of y. Have you done this before? What did we do in naive Bayes? Exactly this. So, a naive Bayes, as it says there, is a generative model. And notice that we are not trying, even though we care about predicting a y given an x, we are instead going out and finding p of functions that give you estimates for p of x given y and p of y, and then use Bayes' rule to construct p of y given x. This is the big difference. In one case, we don't care about the probability of x. We don't really care about probability of x. We just try to train a function that gets you p of y given x. We try to optimize for p of y given x. That's a discriminative model. A generative model tries to find p of x given y and p of y. In other words, p of x comma y. The difference is, in the first case, in the discriminative model, you model the conditional probabilities of the label given the input. In a generative model, you model the joint probability of the input and the label, p of x comma y. The generative models let you come up with something called the generative story. It tells you the story of the data. Given a distribution, how are examples generated? How are the inputs generated? So the way you do that is you start off with circles typically represent random variables, and you have a p of y. It's, for example, for the naive Bayes, it's a coin toss. You toss that coin, you get a plus or a minus, you fix p of y, and now we know, let's say, given the our model, we know p of xi given y, so we first pick the value of this feature. This is another coin toss perhaps. And then independently of that, we pick another feature. We do that multiple times. Once we have picked all the features, we have generated the data. We have generated x and y together. Now, this may seem like a bit of a roundabout point. What's the big deal? You're modeling p of x comma y or p of y given x. They are roughly the same. It turns out they have their relative strengths and weaknesses. And let me just briefly tell you what difference is. I'm not going to go into too much depth here, partly because that will take a few lectures of its own. As I mentioned, the generative model learns p of xy. This tells you how both inputs and outputs are generated. A discriminative model only cares about predicting the output for a particular input. In other words, suppose you have data of this kind, red and blue points, and there is some separator. Notice that the examples themselves have some interesting structure to them. right? A generative model tries to characterize not just the decision boundary, but also how the inputs, how the examples are laid out. In other words, it tries to characterize this whole thing, everything around here. A discriminative model explicitly tries to only find the decision boundary. It doesn't really care that there are these clusters here, there are these clusters here. I only care about predicting a label. So this is like an intuitive, gut feeling, vague, hand wavy reason for why generative models might actually do a lot more heavy lifting. And that's also one of the reasons for why, if you care about applications and if you care only about making your predictor work, a discriminative model often ends up performing better. It just so happens that for example, many NLP and computer vision kinds of applications, the state of the art is often a discriminative model. For this reason, you don't really care about of wasting parameters to describe the inputs. If all you eventually are going to do is apply that decision boundary. And you see examples of discriminative and generative models all over the place. Naive Bayes is a generative model. Some of you may have seen hidden Markov models. If you have, it's a generative model. If you haven't, it still is a generative model. And we'll be talking about logistic regression next. That's a classic example of discriminative model. Some might say things like models like support vector machines are also discriminative, even though there is no explicit mention of a probability going on there. You are explicitly trying to characterize the decision boundary. That's the difference. You don't want to waste parameters to describe the inputs. Questions? Yeah.
So is these two models only limited to probabilistic learning?
Which ones?
Generative and discriminative. Like, can we say SVM is discriminative?
In some sense, SVM is a discriminative model because you are only trying to model the parameter, the decision boundary.
Like all we learned so far are discriminative, right?
Everything we learned so far except naive Bayes. In fact, everything we learned so far, yes, is discriminative. I don't want to include things like decision trees in that or nearest neighbors, but all the linear models that we've seen can be thought of as discriminative models. Generative models are interesting because sometimes you don't have enough data and you want to generate some data for yourself to better train. So if you have a generative model, you can go back, generate some data, try to hypothesize some labels, you hallucinate the labels, try to fit a model to the hallucinated labels and iterate. And this may seem like a goofy thing to do, but in fact it's a named algorithm. It's called expectation maximization, and we'll be looking at it in the next lecture. So, other questions? Yeah?
So decision trees and KNN, they lie in generative models?
I don't want to, I really don't want to take a stab at classifying them. If you force me to, I'll put them closer to the discriminative side of things. Because a decision tree does not really necessarily try to generate data, given the label. But I don't want to, that's kind of pushing it a bit because there are no probabilities involved. You can kind of shoehorn the score that SVM and perceptron gives you as a probability by using the squashing function, but I'm not sure what to do with the decision tree. So the important point I want to mention, which is a good segue for what's coming next, is the difference between naive Bayes and logistic regression. You can think of the naive Bayes algorithm as the generative version of the logistic regression model, and we'll be talking about logistic regression. We'll be talking about how we can do maximum a posteriori estimation for logistic regression, and finally, in a very interesting twist of algebra, it turns out training logistic regression is basically functionally very similar to support vector machines and such things. And probably in your next homework, you'll be trying to convince me how to do that. So let's move to logistic regression. While I'm getting the slides up, if you have any questions, you can try to think them out. Questions? So where are we in the big scheme of things? We spent a lot of time looking at linear models. We spent a lot of time looking at learning as loss minimization. Of course, we also looked at the learning theory kind of stuff, but that's a different story. We looked at learning as loss minimization. We also looked at Bayesian criteria for learning, in particular map and maximum likelihood estimation. And we looked at the naive Bayes classifier. Now, if you knew the punchline of this lecture, you would say that all these things obviously come together into what might be thought of as a logistic regression model. Because the discriminative version of this is logistic regression. Logistic regression can be learned using MAP or MLE. MAP on logistic regression is equivalent functionally, mathematically, to learning as loss minimization, and logistic regression learns a linear model. So all these things nicely come together. So let's cut the tension and get to the main part of this thing. I'll be introducing the model and comparing it to how to naive Bayes, talk about training, and then try to connect all these things together. So the setup is the following. So it's been the same as what we always had. You have feature vectors in Rn. It's a binary classifier, so you have labels which are -1 or +1. Notice that I've been switching between -1 and +1 for binary and 0 and 1 for binary. And I've been doing this mostly as a convenience. If the math works out better for -1, I use -1. The math works out better for 0, I use 0 as for the negative. And they're equivalent, obviously. Right? I mean, if there's a deterministic transformation between these two. So, and the set, we are given some training set S with M examples. These are labeled, and we are still in supervised learning. And in fact, we want to do classification, but let's think about this problem. Binary classification, the output is -1 or +1. What if, instead of predicting a class label, we want to predict the probability of the label being 1? Okay? This is the classic discriminative model. We explicitly say want to try to find a function that approximates P of y given 1 given x. P of y equals 1 given x. In other words, we are searching for the set of functions that can produce probabilities. Our original problem was to search over the set of functions that produce a label. We expanded to search over functions that take an input in RD and produce a number from 0 to 1. Now, if you're producing a number from 0 to 1, this is regression. If your classifier has to produce a real value, then it's a regression problem. And there are many hypothesis spaces, many classes of functions that you can think of that always produce outputs in 0 to 1. From our perspective, for now, for multiple reasons, and I hope to motivate this in at least 2 ways, for multiple reasons, this is a very interesting function, something called the sigmoid function. Some of you have seen this before, some of you may not, but for logistic regression, our hypothesis space is a set of all functions that have the following shape. It's 1 over 1 plus e power minus w dot x. W is a weight vector, x is your feature vector. In other words, it's basically a linear function that is composed with the sigmoid. So this function is sigma is called the sigmoid function, and the sigmoid is a squashing function. It takes any value, any real value, and gives you a value from 0 to 1. So I've answered that question that showed up. The range of a sigmoid function is 0 to 1. The domain is Rn. It fits the at least the kind of function that we are looking for. Turns out this is a good choice of functions to search over for multiple reasons. But before that, just to give you a visual impression of what this function looks like, it looks like an S curve. As the parameter z gets higher and higher, you get closer and closer to 1. As the parameter z lower and lower towards negative infinity, it becomes 0. At negative infinity, it is 0. And in some sense, this is an intuitive choice because remember that the thing that goes into the sigmoid is w dot x. If w dot x gets higher and really high, then the probability should be close to 1. If w dot x is very low, the probability of it being negative, of it being positive, should be close to 0. So that's the assumption that we're going to make with logistic regression. Just as a for your own entertainment, what I'm going to say doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the class, but I just want to think about taking the derivative of this because there are some learning algorithms, not the one that we talk about, which ask you to take the derivative, and it has a rather interesting property. So you take the derivative of the sigmoid function, you do your standard calculus, nothing shocking there, you rearrange, and you get an interesting function that is sigma of z times 1 minus sigma of z. Now, if the sigmoid function were the probability that your label is 1, then 1 minus sigma will be the probability that the label is 0. The derivative of the sigmoid function is simply the product of these two probabilities. Just an interesting point. There are some algorithms which take advantage of this, but not us. We have other ways of doing things.
Well, if you're looking at a Bernoulli random variable, that would be the variance.
Exactly.
of it.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. But this is not the Bernoulli random variable because our probability is defined that way. But yeah, so it has a lot of interest. So the sigmoid function has many interesting properties. Logistic regression has multiple different lenses to look at it. I'm only presenting maybe 3, but there are other ways of looking at it as well. So for logistic regression, what we'll assume is P of y equals 1 given x for a particular w is simply sigmoid of w dot x, w transpose x. And P of y equals minus 1 is 1 minus the sigmoid, which takes that functional form. But really, you can write that as 1 over 1 plus e power w dot x. So let me replace that. Now notice something interesting going on here. These two look exactly the same except for the sign. And the sign of the w dot x inside the exponent is simply minus y, because when y is minus 1, that becomes plus. So I can write P of y given x is 1 over 1 plus e power minus y w transpose x. So again, we come back to this point of minus y of y times w transpose x. We saw that first when we looked at perceptron. We defined that to be, we used that to identify whether there's a mistake. We saw 1 minus y w transpose x when we talked about support vector machines. And a similar sort of a functional form shows up here as well. But also, the other interesting thing to note is that we are modeling explicitly P of y given x and not, there is nothing in this that gives us x given y or P of y. We could compute it, but there's nothing in the model that gives it. There's no way of knowing from this P of x given y. So this is what kind of a model? A discriminative model. Any questions about the functional form or the assumptions that we are making with logistic regression?
Well, instead of W transpose X, could you put some kind of a kernel in there?
Oh, that makes it, you could not, because, well, it becomes more painful. It's not very obvious how to do it, because remember that the reason we were able to get a kernel in is because the prediction is a function of the W, the final W that shows up is a sum of,
It could be a linear combination.
it's a linear combination of inputs, so the fundamental operation that shows up is x transpose x, for some xi and xj. And then you can get a kernel. It turns out you can do something similar. It's not very obvious how, it's not necessarily as It's not one slide of math. Let me put it that way. But yes, the way you get to that is by looking at the optimization that will eventually show up for learning, and then staring hard at the final W that the optimization will produce, and think about what will the W be? Will it be a linear combination of the x's? If it is, then yes, all these games can be played. Yeah.
So the sigmoid function sort of look like CDF of a normal distribution. Is that sort of?
Yes, is that right? No, it's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily the case. No. It looks like
It would look like any CDF.
Huh?
It would resemble any CDF.
It will, yeah, exactly. All CDFs are
Or
increasing
sorry,
functions.
Of a Gaussian distribution. But my question then would, if that is the case, then does that make any assumptions about the distribution of our data?
No, it doesn't. At this point, you're making no assumptions about the distribution of the data because you're not modeling P of x given y. You don't care how the data is distributed. The other interesting point, and this goes back to something I mentioned earlier, if you get a weight vector from perceptron or the SVM algorithms, you could still pass it through the squashing function, the sigmoid function, and pretend that what you have is a probability. You never learned it as a probability, but you could do that. In most practical cases, it turns out that doesn't work too well because that ends up giving you very peaked probabilities. Probabilities, the w dot x in practice ends up being either very highly positive or highly negative, which means the p of the sigmoid function will give you values that are close to 0 or 1, which leads to this whole cottage industry of scaling the output of SVM and perceptron to make it look like make the sigmoid of that look like a probability. So how do you predict with this? What if I only care about, what if I don't want to predict probability of y given x? What if I want to predict actual y? How would you do that? I have given you a function for probability of y given x. How would you predict with it? Say that again?
Maximum of
Maximum of
y equals for these r max over y.
So in other words, if p of 1 given x is greater than 0 given x, you will produce 1 else 0, but that's equivalent to saying if p of 1 given x is greater than half. So predict 1 if p of y given x is greater than half, otherwise you predict 0, and if you work out that what I just said in terms of by substituting into the sigmoid function and looking at what this means in terms of w dot x, it turns out the prediction is exactly sine of w dot x, right? Because you want to predict right, and this means I just 2 is greater than or equal to 1 plus x, or e power minus w transpose x is less than or equal to 1. Something is wrong.
Minus w.
Oh yeah, and yes, and then I take log and I get w transpose x greater than or equal to 0. So the prediction function for logistic regression is simply the sine of w dot x. This is one of the reasons why the sigmoid function is interesting. It has this nice probabilistic interpretation, probability greater than half, very reasonable. If you probability greater than half, you predict 1, and the sigmoid function, the functional form of it implies that's equivalent to taking the sine of the score according to the linear classifier. So again, in what might be a boring thing right now, the logistic regression classifier is also a linear classifier. It's yet another way of thinking about linear classifiers. This time with a bit of probability thrown in. Questions? Yes?
So it seems that this sigmoid function gives more information about data. I mean, I don't understand.
It gives you some notion of uncertainty of the prediction. If I threshold it at half, you only get one bit of information. You only get the label. But if I care not just about thresholding, if the probability is 0.51, is that the same as probability being 0.99? If you care about it, you could use it.
Yeah, so I mean, why it can just, it can give us this information, why for example generative things cannot, I mean, I don't
Here
know.
the generative thing gives you. Naive Bayes also gives you probability of y given x. It just gets it to you using the Bayes rule. What doesn't give you that is SVM without actually getting it through the sigmoid or perceptron. You can think of all of these things. You can always convert the output of these things into probabilities of the class conditional of the posterior. You can always convert the score that your linear classifier produces into a posterior probability by applying it through the sigmoid. Or in the case of naive Bayes, you just get it using Bayes rule. Now here's something fun. Another motivation for why the sigmoid function is interesting. Just to point out, the first reason is there's this interesting linear classifier interpretation. The other one is something that comes from naive Bayes, by staring at naive Bayes. Remember that the naive Bayes classifier produces a label plus if the probability of plus is greater than the probability of minus, but we know that this ratio is a linear function. Notice that in the previous time I had this, I had a bias, now I don't, and we all know how to add or not add a bias by adding this dummy feature. So suppose your naive Bayes classifier produced these probabilities. We know that probability of y equals minus 1 divided by probability of y equals plus 1 is w dot x for some w at x. But we also know that these two things should add up to 1. Now, which means there's only one term here. There's only, I mean, either this, these are not independent of each other. So if you plug that in and just rearrange the terms and do some little bit of algebra, something basically the reverse of what I just did here, you get p of y equals 1 given w is sigmoid of that w dot x. So in some sense, if the naive Bayes classifier was a linear classifier, which it is, and you had access only to the linear classifier, then you can produce the posterior distribution using the sigmoid function. You can produce p of y given x using the sigmoid function by just passing it because of this algebra. But the naive Bayes classifier gets to p of y given x in this roundabout manner. First take p of x given y, decompose it, the product, then p of multiplied by p of y, and then that is proportional to p of y given x, the probability posterior. What if, knowing very well that the naive Bayes does this anyway, why don't we just train this directly? So in this sense, the naive Bayes classifier is the discriminative, the logistic regression classifier is the discriminative version of the naive Bayes classifier, where you know that the function that you're going to predict is going to be of this form. Why waste your modeling effort to get to this in a roundabout fashion? Why not just train this directly? So this is reason number 2 or 3 for why this is an interesting function. Yes?
I was thinking, what would be the effect of noise if we compare SVM and this? Because as we are calculating probabilities, we're not predicting the actual output. Will the effect of noise be less on these logistics?
Keep that question in mind. We'll come back to that maybe in about 15 minutes. That's a good question. But the short answer is not so much. They are roughly the same.
I was saying 0.51 and 0.9 are not the same, right?
Yeah, sure. I can say that in SVM, for example, w dot x, let's take 2 examples. W transpose x is, say, 1 for one example. W transpose x1 is 1, W transpose x2 is 1,000,000. But you predict both of them as positive. because you only look at the sign. You're doing similar, you're doing a thresholding anyway. In fact, you're doing the same thresholding because you're looking at the sign. So the summary is both logistic regression and naive Bayes try to compute the same functional form when it comes to the posterior. Naive Bayes does not explicitly try to learn that function, whereas logistic regression explicitly learns that function. Questions? Yes.
So for naive Bayes cannot represent any linear functions you mentioned.
But where's the magic here?
So for those functions that cannot be represented by naive Bayes, we can still do logistic regression to find a W.
Yes,
right?
it will get you a different W. Yes. And in fact, I would say if at any point you have a choice between different linear learning algorithms that learn linear models, think of naive Bayes last. First pick either SVM, logistic regression, or average perceptron, whichever code you have lying around. And then if none of them work, then you really don't have a linear function. But if you use logistic regression only if you're in a crunch and you really don't have any code lying around and it's due in 10 minutes. So let's say, okay, so this is the general story about the model. Why is this model interesting? Why is this a reasonable thing to do? And what is this function doing? So the only thing left is how do you actually train? Remember that the logistic regression classifier is a probabilistic model. It produces the probability of y given x, which means we can use Bayesian criteria for training. What do I mean by that? How do you train? Let's go back, let's think about this. You're given some training data, and the Bayesian way of learning is to find a set of parameters that maximizes the likelihood of observing the training set. We've seen this like about 3 times now, and this is the 4th instance. So this is maximum likelihood learning, where you try to find the maximum, the W that gets you the highest value of, that assigns the highest probability to this particular data set. And we also know that we assume that our examples are drawn IID from some distribution, which means every example is independent of the other. So what do we do next? How do you deal with this probability of S? S is this entire set given W. And we've done this also like at least 2 times now. In particular, we did that for naive Bayes. What does IID give you?
Just separate, just multiply each.
Exactly. So if you want P of S, the maximum P of S given W is equal to simply just each example is independent of the other, so you can just take the product. So you apply that. So we care about maximizing that function. And then the trick is the same. Once you want to maximize a product, the simplest thing to do is, we know very well how to take derivatives of sums. So we take the log. Log is an increasing function, so the argmax will not change. In fact, you can only use log because it's an increasing function. Can't use sine, for example. You cannot use negative log, for example, because, well, you could use negative log. It's monotone, so the argmax becomes argmin. Ignore what I said about negative logs. You can't use a function that's not monotone. So solving that maximization is equivalent to solving this maximization, sum over log p. But we know how to write p of y given x, because our model assumes that p of y given x is the sigmoid of y times w transpose x. So we know our model gives us that, so log of that is simply minus log of the denominator. Okay? Which means learning is equivalent to maximizing sum of that expression there. Log of 1 plus e power minus y w transpose x. It may seem like a lot to say because there are many, many things, and it's also not fun to write in LaTeX. But it's an interesting function. And I don't want to necessarily get into too much detail about it, but let's think about this particular function for a minute. What if y and w transpose x have different signs? Meaning, if y and w transpose x, remember that prediction is the sign of w transpose x. So if y and w transpose x have different signs, the term inside the exponent will be negative, which means e power that will be positive. This whole thing becomes a large thing, minus of that becomes small. What this means is this expression likes to penalize weight vectors that assign different sign, that gives you a different sign to y and w transpose x. In some sense, it's penalizing mistakes. So this is the logistic loss function. It's a loss because loss functions penalize mistakes. This is a function that says I don't like x or w transpose x and y to have different signs, and you minimize that loss. So this fits under the umbrella of loss minimization. The term that's missing in this is the regularizer. But we can always get the regularizer, and here's the other reason for using regularizers. So I mentioned when we introduced regularizers, I gave two reasons. In support vector machines, I introduced regularizer by saying the regularizer maximizes margin. And then there's also this whole VC dimension argument. The regularizer is a function that penalizes complexity. It penalizes hypotheses that are more complex. If you're a Bayesian, what you would say is a regularizer is simply another prior. And what you're doing is maximum a posteriori estimation. Here's the third perspective on regularization. You could add priors on the weights. And in particular, let's pretend that the weights themselves are random. The weight vector is a random variable. And each weight is independent, and it's drawn from a zero mean random normal distribution whose standard deviation, well, variance is sigma square. Which means P of the PDF, the probability density function of W, because they are all independent, is simply the product of a bunch of quotients. This is your prior. And now we can do maximum a posteriori estimation. I have the maximum likelihood estimation here just for comparison. So we have a prior on the W, which says I like W's that are closer to the origin. In some sense, that expression there will get higher as Wi becomes closer to 0. In the absence of any information, in the absence of any training data, the best weight vector is the one that is the origin. The highest, most probable weight vector according to that model is the origin, the 0 vector. So remember that also when we were talking about regularization, we had the following expression. Minimize had this. In the absence of any training data, if I minimize this, it takes you to the origin. The prior, this normal prior also does the same thing. In the absence of any training data, if I only try to find the argmax of W over P of W, we get the 0 vector. But obviously we have training data. So we can learn by solving, instead of, we want to find probability, find the W that maximizes P of W given S, which is equal to or proportional to so if you want to maximize P of W given S, we can maximize this expression here, and this is the maximizing this is called maximum a posteriori. It's the posterior distribution of the W. And now comes the ugly bit. We can just put all of this in. We already know that our data is IID, so this product shows up. And we assume by the assumption the prior is a collection of independent Gaussians. So the second product shows up. What do we do next? We want to maximize a bunch of products. Take log. Convert all the products to sums, and you get a term that looks like this. There's max. Oh, there should be a minus here. There's max over max of some term that just sums over all the data. And then notice that the second term is simply sum over all Wi square. I can rewrite it. Oh, the minus mysteriously showed up. I can rewrite as the standard, the variance is common, I can pull it out and I get 1 over sigma square W transpose W. So effectively we get back that form. Questions? So at this point there are two kinds of people in this class. Type 1, people for whom this is blindingly obvious and are wondering why I'm spending so much time on this. Type 2, people who are scared by a slide full of math. I can assure you when I first saw something like this, I was type 2. So don't feel shy about asking questions. Yes?
I think both groups are coming to the same conclusion though.
Which is?
Why are you going over this?
Why am I going over this? Good question. The point of this is we want to learn a logistic regression classifier which can be done as maximum a posteriori estimation. And maximum a posteriori estimation is equivalent to maximizing this function there, the line at the bottom. Let me pull it up and bring it to the top. Getting rid of all the minuses, training a logistic regression classifier can be done by minimizing this expression here. And this expression fits very neatly into something we've already seen before. It fits this form of, there's a regularizer, but because we have Bayesian, it's not a regularizer, it's a prior. And there's a loss, but because we have Bayesian, it's not a loss, it's the log of the posterior of each label. So, and here's the fun bit, which is fun because you're going to do it. Well, first of all, I've given away the answer to this. It is, we've seen this before because of this loss minimization. The fun bit is you can write down stochastic gradient descent for this, where you want to take the gradient of this function now instead of gradient of the Hinge loss. There is no subgradient because this is a continuous function and differentiable. The Hinge loss is not differentiable. You can just take the gradient and go down the gradient. All the fun that you had with stochastic gradient descent can be brought into logistic regression by just changing the gradient. So it's roughly about 2 lines of code that's different from your SVM. So if you've got an SVM solver, notice that you already have a perceptron solver because perceptron and SVM are very similar because the only difference is the regularizer. But once you have the regularizer in, SVM and logistic regression are also very similar. The only difference is in the actual functional form of the gradient. And it's possible, quite likely, that I might make you do that for the next homework. Historically though, logistic regression has been solved using another learning algorithm called LBFGS. It's a secant-based optimization method. If you've not seen that before, I don't want to labor it. But personally, I find it so much easier to think of this from the gradient descent perspective. So, are there questions about this? At this point, I'm not going to go over the gradient descent and all those things, partly because you must be comfortable doing it yourself, because it's simple calculus. So I want to wind up this lecture with a trip back to loss minimization and just re-examining some stuff that we did maybe a month ago. And I want you to think about what we did today in that context. You can think of learning a discriminative classifier. Very often it ends up being minimizing some particular loss. The setup is you're given some training examples and you want to find a hypothesis that seems to perform similarly as your true oracle function that's hidden. And the way you do that is you define a function L or loss that penalizes bad hypotheses, and you want to find a hypothesis H that minimizes expected loss over the entire data. Loss is a function that takes two predictions and says these two are the same or these two are not the same. I like these two, I don't like these two. And you want to minimize expected loss. Unfortunately, expected loss minimization is not entirely doable, partly because we don't have the entire training set. We don't even know the distribution of the data. Instead, we approximate it with empirical loss on the training set. We are given a training set. So that gives us the loss minimization, empirical loss minimization objective. And if you only minimize the loss on the data and your function class is rich enough, you will overfit. So we need to, in addition, have a capacity control term which pushes the learner towards simpler hypotheses. This is called the regularizer. Now I'm introducing this again, going back to the non-Bayesian notation, but if you're a Bayesian, the regularizer does not penalize complex functions. It is simply the log. It's simply the log prime that we just spoke about. So then, learning can be seen as loss minimization, or actually minimizing regularized loss. You have two terms in your objective. There's a regularizer which penalizes functions in the absence of any data, and then there's the loss which penalizes functions that do badly on your training set. And you want to balance these two. So you want to balance overfitting and underfitting. In particular, with linear classifiers, you have something called L2 regularization, which is simply minimizing the norm of the W. And then we looked at multiple loss functions. What's the ideal loss function for binary classification? What is the function that we want to what we hope we can minimize?
0, 1 loss?
0, 1. The 0, 1 loss. The 0, 1 loss is simply the error function. It's the function that given y and y prime would say 0 if they are equal and 1 if they are not equal. Unfortunately, I mentioned before, 0, 1 loss is not tractable, or minimizing the 0, 1 loss is not tractable, so we need surrogates. We have already seen one surrogate, which is the SVM loss, and the SVM loss is the hinge loss, which approximates the 0, 1 loss with this orange curve here. And on this same picture, the logistic loss tries to approximate the 0, 1 loss with a different loss function. It's just, as far as, from this perspective, logistic regression is simply empirical risk minimization with a particular loss function. I could have used another one, but I just seem to like this. And your choice of why you might want to use this can range from, I philosophically believe that predicting probabilities is the right thing to do, or I have some code lying around, or something in between. But end of the day, under this view of life, we want to ideally optimize the 0, 1 loss, and we replace it with surrogates. And there's a whole loss, yes? And there's the whole loss function too that we saw before. In the beginning we saw perceptron loss. The perceptron loss is actually hinge loss, but just shifted so that this point is at the origin. And then there's the hinge loss, there's the exponential loss, which is what AdaBoost minimizes. And there's the logistic loss, which, not surprisingly, logistic regression minimizes. And this is how all these things fit together nicely in this grand scheme of machine learning. You can either be a Bayesian, and you could say, I want to define a certain probabilistic model and do map estimation. Or you could be frequentist and say, I don't know anything about probabilities, I just want to minimize loss. 0-1 loss is just hard to minimize, so let me pick a particular loss function, the logistic loss or the hinge loss, and minimize it. So, from the practical point of view, I must say I found that really there is not much of a difference between SVM or logistic regression on most problems. I have not seen any. They end up performing roughly similarly unless you and the reason for that is this picture. They are fairly. One might argue that they are different functions. They look so different. One of them is continuous. The other one is. One of them is differentiable. The other one is not, and such things. But in practice, those things don't matter much. And if anyone asks you, I didn't tell you that. The nice thing about logistic regression is that your loss function is differentiable. But we know how to do subgradient descent. So that's also not all that much of a big deal. So let me wrap up, unless there are questions. Logistic regression, there's a grammatical mistake. Logistic regression predicts probabilities. The model predicts a probability that the label is +1 given a particular input. It can be seen as the discriminative counterpart of the naive Bayes. It can be seen as a discriminative classifier that minimizes the logistic loss over the training set. It can be seen as a discriminative classifier that fits the logistic function using map or MLE estimation. Questions? Yes?
How will you generate label using logistic regression?
How will you generate labels?
You have probability of 0.5, how will you say it positive or?
If you have probability equals 0.5, when will you have probability equals 0.5?
No, let's say 0.6.
Then you will say 1.
Directly, you will not figure out, don't have a threshold of.
Threshold is half. If you give me a different threshold, I'll ask you where did that come from?
That's what I want to ask. Do we have different thresholds for different problems, or we just?
It depends. I've seen that happen actually, where you try to have, if you want to be, let's say you care about making mistakes on the positive class. If the classifier predicts plus, it should be a plus. If it predicts a 0 or a minus and you miss a few, it's okay. Then you'll increase the threshold, so that the ones that it predicts, you're confident. So it's called the precision recall trade-off. Other questions? Yes?
Can we see that probability that is provided as the probability of each plus or minus as a distance of the points from the...
It is actually the distance from the hyperplane. If you do this log transformation, just because W transpose X has a one-to-one mapping with the probability, it corresponds to a distance. And as distance becomes closer to infinity or negative infinity, these points will get, the probability will get close to plus or 1 or 0. Yes, in fact, that's the right intuition. Other questions? If there are no questions, I'll be around, but the next class we're going to start something rather interesting. So far we've been talking about supervised learning. Next time we're going to try to learn without label data, and that will lead us to algorithm called expectation maximization.